All right, here we are. Unit 8. End of a long summer for me. Getting these together. We're going to talk about disorders and we're going to talk about therapy. So 5 more lectures to go here in a pretty quick unit. I know it seems like, wow, we're going to do all this in 5 lectures. Yeah, because a lot of these things we've been addressing already throughout. So we're just going to kind of get this all together with the humanism and the social cognitive and the psychoanalytic thought and all that stuff that we've talked about before. And we've already talked a little bit about depression and anxiety and these narcissism and all these other things. So this is just going to kind of put it in a neat little package here for the last 5 lectures. So let's start out by talking about what is a psychological disorder. All right, the real quick, tricky thing about a disorder is it's got to get in the way of your day-to-day life. All right, that's pretty much the main thing. For example, just because someone is a narcissist does not mean that they have a narcissistic personality disorder if being a narcissist allows them to go through their daily lives and have relationships and everything else. That's just a personality trait. It's not a disorder. You know, we can all feel anxious. You know, speaking in front of the public for a lot of people is very, very anxiety induced and makes them nervous and everything else. But if you're not speaking in front of the public that often and it's not part of your job and it doesn't get in the way of your day-to-day life, your anxiety isn't a disorder. It's just being anxious. I mean, you go through a breakup, a divorce, move, and you feel a little bit down for a while and it makes you sad and you feel depressed. Nothing wrong with that because there's a cause of that. It can be directed towards that. But if it gets in the way of you being able to have relationships, get a job, or things like that, that's when it becomes a disorder. And what is a disorder for one person may not be so for somebody else. So again, does it get in the way of you having a healthy day-to-day life? We all have bad days. We all have bad weeks. When the bad week becomes a bad month becomes a bad year, that's when it's getting in the way of your day-to-day life. 4 common characteristics. First off, is the behavior deviant, different from your cultural norms? Murder is criminal behavior. It's criminal behavior, but it's heroic if you're serving in the military. So again, does it go away from life that you're used to doing or that your culture sees as acceptable? You know, does it deviate from that? The idea of a guy in his 20s being attracted to a girl who is a teenager, 15, 14, we look at that here in America, most areas, and that's you're a pedophile. You're on Dateline NBC. Yet in some cultures, 15-year-old girls are getting married to 20-year-old men in their 20s, if not older. And it's part of a prearranged marriage, whatnot. So it's not deviating from cultural norm. We can get into a debate on how healthy that is, but it's part of a cultural norm. So it's not going to be looked at so much as a disorder. Is it distressful? A subjective feeling that something is really, really wrong. Is it dysfunctional? When a person's ability to go about their day-to-day life is clearly measurably impaired. You know, we can all be stay-at-home homebodies. That's fine. But when you can't leave your home to go to a job, that's dysfunctional. We can all be afraid of heights. That's fine. But when you can't take a job on the 38th floor because of a fear of heights, that's a problem. Irrational. Does the behavior not necessarily have a root cause? It's often unjustifiable. That's another sort of thing. So again, deviant, distressful, dysfunctional, irrational, these are the 4 common characteristics. Doesn't go with cultural norms, all these things. But again, I'll give you another example of not going along with what is normal behavior. Somebody who is homeless downtown and claims that he sees Jesus, you know, and he can hear Jesus's voice inside of his mind. Well, that's schizophrenic. But a preacher on Sunday who says, the Lord came to me and talked to me, well, that's okay. That's okay. So again, in some cultures, hearing, voices is being in touch with another dimension. There's all these different things there. All right. So let's take a look at this. Some stereotypes and myths of disorders. First off, a psychological disorder is incurable. No, not necessarily. It's not so much curing it, it's learning to live with it. My wife, who suffers from depression, which, by the way, happened before she met me. I can understand. I'd be no. My wife's depression originally kicked in prior to us dating, about her sophomore year of high school, and we did not date until she was a freshman in college. And she's susceptible to depression. It's in her family tree. Her grandmother on her father's side committed suicide due to depression. She refers, and she's had many depressive episodes in her life, was actually going through one when we dated in college, but I didn't realize it because to me, it was just her normal behavior. But she's had major depressive episodes in her life, none in the last 10 years since we've been married, but she is susceptible to it. And what she likes to refer to depression as a way to explain it is it's like someone with asthma. You're never going to cure yourself from asthma, but you want to put yourself in a position where your asthma doesn't flare up. You learn to live with it and you can have a very happy life. And she's just got to make sure that she's not in a place where she is more susceptible to depression. So the idea that psychological disorders are incurable, you may never make it completely, some may never make it back to society, but most people can have really normal lives with a disorder. Mentally ill people are violent and dangerous. There's another myth, very modest group. And also mentally ill people behave in bizarre ways and very differently from normal people. Again, only a small minority of cases. They make great CSI episodes. They make great movies. But most people who are suffering from any sort of mental disorder, and I'm talking about to a point where it's a disorder, you don't know it. They're amongst you. I mean, if you take a look at this table right here, the percentage of Americans reporting selected psychological disorders in a single year, 3% are going to hit anxiety, generalized anxiety, social anxiety at 7%, 9% with a phobia, about 10% with a mood disorder, 1% OCD, 1% schizophrenia, 3.5% will report some form of PTSD, 4.1% ADHD. So any mental disorder, it's a fourth of the population, and you don't know it because most people don't wear it on their sleeves. They don't make a jersey or things like that. Disorders often become minimized by using them to label people or action inappropriately. When you go, oh my God, you're so psycho, that's not a nice thing to say. Or when someone goes, oh geez, you're so up and down, you're so bipolar. No, that's not what bipolar is. And hopefully over the next few lectures, we'll kind of address that. But when someone just goes, oh, you're so OCD or whatever, without knowing what it is and minimizing the importance of it, that becomes a problem. Oh, they're so psycho, schizo, OCD, bipolar, and things like that. It minimizes really the debilitation that these disorders can in fact be. Okay. Not only are they almost always used inaccurately, they minimize it, as I said before. I should read this. Now, rates of disorders, again, in America, any particular year, 20 to 25% of people will report a psychological disorder. Doing this right now in the summer of 2021, I would say that COVID probably has cranked that up a little bit. People getting some cabin fever, staying inside, a little bit more anxiety filled of, are you wearing a mask? Are you positive? Are you negative? All those things. It's probably cranked up a little bit more than 20 or 25 at this particular time. But an estimated 40 to 50% of Americans will suffer from some disorder at some time of their life. That's half of us. Now, again, when you break down the groups, it becomes pretty interesting. Men are more susceptible to substance abuse, antisocial personality disorders, because a lot of men, it's about repressing emotions. You're not allowed to say what you feel and what you think and stuff like that. So since you can't deal with emotions, a lot of guys will turn to drugs and alcohol and sometimes do things that are antisocial because this feeling of you must be dominant, you must win, and that sort of pressure. And I'm not saying women can't be that, guys tend to be more. When you take a look over here, and ethnicity, you can go the whole thing into that. But when you talk about people who are going to have alcohol abuse or dependency issues in their lifetime, nearly 1 out of every 4 men, but only 1 out of every 20 women will face this. And again, when you talk about antisocial personality disorder, 0.8% of women, but 4.5% of men will see that as part of their lives, where again, women more likely to have anxiety, 5% to 2%, twice as likely to have a phobia, 50% more likely to have OCD, twice as likely to have depression, a little bit more with schizophrenia there, because women are told to A, be more in touch with your emotions, but B, be fearful. Be fearful. You'll get pregnant. You'll be attacked. Don't go there alone. What are you wearing? And, things like that. You don't have control. You can't say what you feel if it's going to offend others. So this idea of hopelessness with depression or fear of attack, of anxiety, women are more susceptible to that than men. And I'm not saying that men can't be, but sometimes men are in an altered state where they're not dealing with it. So again, see some graphics right there. When we take a look at population and disorders that go through, feel free to pause on that. All right, now schools of thought on why we have psychological disorders. Again, and we've talked about biological, behavioral, psychodynamic, cognitive, humanistic, sociocultural, biopsychosocial. Biological would say that you're born with it. Behavioral would say that you've learned it. Psychodynamic would say it's an unresolved issue. Cognitive would say it's faulty thinking. Humanistic would say it's just a block to personal growth. Sociocultural, it's what you see around you, or is it a combination? And again, that's just a lot of words. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're afraid to fly, okay? Not you, because you're wonderful and you're perfect. Let's say I have a patient and this patient comes to me and they're afraid of flying, okay? Well, according to the biological perspective, the reason that you're afraid of flying is because your neurotransmitters are hitting at different levels than what you were supposed to be born with. So as a result of that, I need to give you medication to make your neurotransmitters, your dopamine levels and your serotonin levels for your mood and whatnot. I need to sort of level that out. The behavioral psychologist would say that the reason you're afraid to fly on a plane is because you learned to be afraid of flying on a plane. You weren't born afraid of flying on a plane. You learned to become afraid of flying on a plane because you were a kid and you had a toy plane and you lost it, so you don't trust planes. So that could have been it. Well, that's a little bit more psychodynamic, but you learn to get nervous on it. So if you learn to become afraid of planes, then certainly you can learn to not become afraid of planes. Now, again, psychodynamic, a little bit with that behavioral is maybe you lost a toy plane when you were a kid. Maybe your mom ran away with a pilot. Maybe you watched a movie when you were a kid and it just scared you to death. So there's something in your past and we have to untie that knot. Cognitive therapists would say the reason you're afraid of flying on a plane is because you're focusing on all the planes that crash. Quit focusing on the planes that crash. Focus on the ones that take off and land okay. All right, if you focus on those, you're going to have more success. The humanistic perspective would say, well, is it important that you fly? Can you be a better person at your job if you fly? Is that what's going on? The sociocultural would say you're afraid because other people are talking about being afraid of flying. But if other people start talking about, hey, we should fly again because, COVID's going down and we can get back on the airplane, then I'll get back on the airplane. But if I say, no, you shouldn't fly because the people, it's a road, the air rage and all that, I'm not going to do that. And then the biopsychosocial is sort of a combination plate of all these. So again, the biopsychosocial perspective assumes that the biological, sociocultural, and psychological factors all combine to sort of lead us into what we are. So it takes in all these schools of thoughts on this, because again, how I think impacts how I feel. And how I feel and how I think impacts those around me, and those around me impact how I think and how I feel. All right, so that's sort of what's going on there. Now, the medical model would say that psychological disorders have a little bit more of a physiological cause, which goes a little bit more on the bio than the psycho and the social. So sometimes these can be treated, sometimes they can be completely cured, but sometimes psychological disorders should be treated like any other physical disease, and it should be addressed like any other physical disease. To have a bad mind, not a bad mind, but to have dysfunctional thoughts And irrational thoughts is like having a dysfunctional heart. It's like having dysfunctional lungs. It's within your body and it impacts you. How we think impacts how we feel. How we feel impacts how we think. All right. Now, again, the heritability, we'll talk about this as we get down the road. Some are more heritable than others, like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, anorexia, and the like. My wife sounded right. But then some of them, it's a little bit less heredity. It's a little bit more of what's going on. Again, my wife, who does have depression because it is in her family, but there also kind of has to be an episode to trigger the depression a little bit. And I'll talk about that when we get to depression in the next lecture. Now, the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, last updated in 2013. Before it was DSM-4 and 321 on back. This is an essential feature to define psychological disorders in a methodical and medical fashion. It's basically a book, a textbook, or a book of symptoms and everything else where you can go, oh, these are the symptoms of this thing. These are the characteristics of this. These are ways that this has been attacked and whatever. And it basically gives doctors and professionals this sort of handbook of how to do this. Not only does it give a handbook and say that these are the characteristics of each of these things and they have to hit this in order to be that, it also legitimizes psychological disorders to be true medical disorders. And since they are medical disorders, they can be covered by health insurance. This is very recent. Up until 15, 20 years ago, this was all out-of-pocket stuff, so people were less likely to get help. But now, they're much more likely to do this. Now, again, this is looked at as a work in progress. Up until 1973, which I think was the DSM-3, homosexuality was cited as a disease until 1973. Of course, it's not. The DSM-5 has been rejected by some, including the National Institute of Mental Health, citing many issues within it. Recent versions address new issues like gaming disorders, gambling disorders, social media addiction. Asperger's syndrome has now been part of the autism spectrum since 2013. Binge eating disorder is now an official mental disorder since 2013. Hoarding, general identity disorder, other things have been added to it. And some things like homosexuality have been taken away from it. So it is an evolving document that you have there. Or book, it's a book, it's a big, thick book. All right, so of these disorders, let's first talk about, today we're going to talk about anxiety, okay? Now again, we all feel anxiety, we all feel anxious, but an anxiety disorder is an overwhelming sense of fear that is either based on specific irrational thoughts, you know, I'm afraid of snakes, whatever, or random thoughts where you're afraid, but you don't know why you're afraid. 20% of Americans, 1 out of 5, will face an anxiety disorder at some point of their lives. We'll all face anxiety, but to actually have a disorder where it gets in the way of your day-to-day functions is 20%. Again, it's a normal reaction to stress, triggered by a stressor, has a start and an ending point. That's normal. This is normal stuff on this side. You know, a response to a toxic situation, relaxing will make you feel better, whatever. But a disorder can come out of nowhere. Intense, disproportionate emotional response to a normal thing, you know, to burst out when you get into assignment, you burst out into tears rather than just, you know, that could be part of an anxiety disorder. Again, interfering with the day-to-day physical symptoms that we'll talk about here in a second as well. Going to impact 20% of Americans, not only characterized by the feeling of anxiety, but also the dysfunctional behaviors that are used to reduce the feeling. Ironically, avoiding the things that make us anxious often tend to increase the anxiety. Avoidance breeds anxiety instead of just facing the issue. And again, the physical symptoms that come with it, think of anxiety as being stuck in that GAS, you know, the general adaptation syndrome we talked about before. And since your body is sort of battling this thing that's out there and your heart's racing and whatever, your body's not doing what it's supposed to do. It's not making your skin be right. It's your hair is falling out. You got pimples all over your face. You're not digesting your food well. And then our symptoms of anxiety make us feel sick, which gives us more to be anxious about. But again, sometimes you just got to deal with the issue. When you avoid it, it breeds it. This idea about emotional safety, which has been huge in the last few years. Most college students it's an absolute right, according to most college students, resulting in turning away controversial speakers for those who we disagree with. And so because college has to be a safe place. Don't bring the speaker to college because he's offensive. Yeah, but you know what? If you're so offended by it, maybe you need to hear it so that you're not offended. Either you're not offended by it anymore, or you can at least deal with other opinions being there. Other people are going to think differently than you. You got to become okay with that. You know, other people are going to be different than you. You got to be okay with that. And when you talk about these safe zones and safe spaces, and I get that there are some people that are aggressively dangerous, but when you take every little thing as a trigger, it exaggerates what's truly dangerous. And it assumes everything is hostile, leading to increased anxiety. Every joke is intended to hurt you and it's going to stop you from going to the next place. When sometimes a joke is just a joke. Somebody else's beliefs, all they are, their beliefs. They can't hurt me. They're their beliefs. I have my beliefs and my beliefs can't hurt them. My beliefs can't hurt you unless I act on these beliefs, and that's discrimination, and that's some other things, all right? So again, when we're talking about a generalized anxiety disorders, this is when you are continuously tense, you're continuously apprehensive, you're experiencing unfocused, negative, out of control feelings. It's vague. You don't know why it is. Again, it's the second most common disorder in America, right behind substance abuse. Number one, it afflicts about 1 in 6 Americans, 32 people in the United States. My daughter, Faith, who's she's about a year away from getting her PhD in pharmacy, she does suffer from generalized anxiety disorder. She can have panic attacks out of nowhere. This is real. This is a real thing. And my daughter, Julia, also has some anxiety issues as well. This is real. I'm not belittling this in any way. It's real. It's out there. I think my son Quincy even got a little bit of anxiety. Okay, so again, fear, feeling tense, easily startled, constantly worried. And again, folks, we all can feel tense. But when you're feeling tense and you don't know why you're feeling tense, you know, when you're startled and you're on the edge and you don't know why you're on the edge, it becomes so constant, you're unable to make decisions or enjoy life because you're always, when's the other foot going to drop? Physical symptoms, muscle tensions, difficulty sleeping, poor appetite. Basically, again, your body in that GAS all the time. And the resulting behavior is self-defeating because it leads to more anxiety. You know, when I become tense, I'm starting to feel tense about being tense. And again, this can be partially inherited as well. I'm going to try to pause this real quick because my dogs are having anxiety. All right, sorry about that. Wife came home. So again, a lot of times when people have anxiety, their reaction to anxiety causes more anxiety. When suddenly you become short on breath and you don't know how you're going to breathe, that can lead to more anxiety. When suddenly you're breaking out, when suddenly your fingernails are crumbling, when suddenly, you know, you can't think straight. Now you're unsure why you can't think straight and when is this going to end. These all are symptoms of a generalized anxiety disorder because you can't tie it to one specific thing. At least with a phobia, if I'm afraid of heights, I can get on the elevator and go to a lower floor. But a generalized anxiety disorder, you're not quite sure what the trigger is that's causing the anxiety. And some more stuff there on the two disorders if you want to take some time to look at it. Now, again, when it comes to an anxiety attack, extreme anxiety results in physiological panic attacks, difficulty breathing, chest pains, feeling of doom. It's all around you. And again, it becomes global. There's no way I can escape this. You don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And your limbic system hijacks the brain and body while the prefrontal cortex becomes paralyzed. So again, your amygdala is going off and it's just going, we're scared and this is why and everything else. And then your hippocampus is remembering all the bad times that you've had and have led to this. Meanwhile, your prefrontal cortex, it goes, you know what? This will go away if you just breathe a little bit. It's shut down. Typically, an anxiety attack lasts just a few minutes, but it shows up without warning. And then what you start to have is anxiety about having an anxiety attack. I remember when my daughter Faith was in high school, she did her last 2 years at Woods, and she didn't like dating because she knew she had anxiety attacks. And she was like, you know, how do I tell this guy I'm going on a first date with that, you know, he may need to pull over so I can throw up or whatever. And so it's the fear of the attack, which is going to cause the avoidance of people, cause the avoidance of things, because you can't tie it to one specific thing. That's a generalized anxiety disorder. Now, again, these panic attacks, there's less activity again in the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex. So logic and reasoning don't work. So when you ask someone who's having a panic attack, why don't you just calm down? No, they can't. There's no logic behind this. The thalamus is overactive because it's taking in all these sort of cues from these different senses throughout your body, and you're starting to fear it even more. There was a study done in 1989 where they looked at the levels of stress prior to an attack. Here are the control subjects not going through stress. Here are the people who had a panic disorder. And notice that just 2 months prior to the panic disorder, their stress started to go up. And that's where the panic. So a lot of times a panic attack is a buildup of things. A lot of times have been repressed and have been repressed. More things there on the panic cycle. Now, again, symptoms can be fainting, nausea, and again, those are rare. Fear of dying, again, kind of rare. But then the most common, jumpy, tense, unable to relax, confusion, just sort of a weakness all over. And it happens with a lot of people. Take a look at these celebrities right here. Not that I'm trying to worship celebrities or anything, but these are people you're familiar with. Adele. Is that Ryan Reynolds? Reynolds or Gosling? I get confused. Maybe that's why I has anxiety. I keep getting confused with Gosling or Reynolds, whichever one it is. Selena Gomez, Hunger Games girl. Going to go back to that. John Mayer, Jenny McCarthy, the late George Michael, Sarah Silverman, Emma Stone, Taylor Swift, Charlize Theron, Oprah. Why can't I remember her name? She's a very, very good actor. I loved her in Silver Linings Notebook. Jennifer Lawrence. There we go. Jennifer Lawrence. So these are all celebrities that have gone public with their anxiety. And notice singer, sometimes singer have to get on stage in front of thousands of people. And once they get on stage, it's okay, but it's the lead up, it's the anxiety, you know, and again, the fame of, okay, how will this show go? How will I put this out there? What will the people think? You know, all that paranoia that sort of comes with it. And again, panic attacks can lead to phobia, but a phobia is different because a phobia is a specific thing. You're disabled, overwhelmed because of a specific object, but again, it's intense, it's irrational. Now, to be afraid of tigers is fine if you're around a tiger, but it shouldn't sort of get in the way of your day-to-day life. You're afraid of sharks, stay out of the water, no big deal. But a lot of times the phobias that really sort of lead to panic attacks are phobias that show up all the time. Again, agoraphobia is the most common phobia, and it's a fear of public places, followed by, again, various types of animals. So what it does is it leads to avoidance, which in turn increases the odds of the anxiety getting worse because you never deal with the issue. We'll talk about this when we get to therapy. That part of therapy is exposure therapy, where you need to deal with it. Sometimes if you're afraid of heights, you need to get up to the second or third floor and work your way up. You're afraid of planes, you need to at least sit on one for a while and realize that there's a little bit of an irrational feeling that's going on there. Now, again, reasons for phobias could be biological, you know, because again, natural selection, those people who did not take risks were more likely to live and reproduce. So there's something about anxiety is good for us because anxiety allows us to last longer in life. Identical twins are likely to develop the same phobias even if they're raised separately. So it's a little bit in our DNA. Behavioral, generalized to do other things you may have experienced. Social, you may have learned it by observing others. My daughter Faith has anxiety, and she was the first girl after two boys. And my wife, when she had Faith, just loved her so much, but was also afraid the boys were going to hurt her, because my wife had bad experiences with boys in high school and college, and the husband that she had for 20 years. So she was kind of overprotective of Faith as a little baby. And sometimes when she was this little baby, she would just watch her and just make sure she would wait for her to wake up, and then always wanted to protect her. So some of that might have rubbed off a little bit. My wife's own anxiety sort of being pushed on there. And again, there's a difference between a fear and a phobia. We all have fears. We all have preferences. You know, I like to stay at home, but I could leave the house. I don't like going to parties, but I could. Okay, so there's a difference between a preference and a fear versus a phobia. A phobia will paralyze you. You can't think, you can't function, you can't act, versus something that I just don't want to do or makes me uncomfortable. All right, so here's specific phobias and things about that. If you want to pause there. Here we're talking about agoraphobia, again, the fear of public places, claustrophobia, the fear of, being enclosed, and other phobias as well. Now, obsessive compulsive disorder. Let's talk about this one real quick, because this is one of the most misunderstood disorders. Someone goes, oh, I'm so neat and I need everything perfect. I'm so OCD. That has nothing to do with OCD. You might be a little anal retentive, but it has nothing to do with OCD. OCD is anxiety that is reflected in the thoughts of anxiety with compulsive actions, okay? And again, common in everyday life for us to have obsessive thoughts and compulsive actions and habits and whatnot. But when it's sort of uncontrollable, that's when it becomes a big deal. So again, an obsession is this endless thought. A compulsion is this ritualized behavior. Okay, for example, let's say this lamp right here, you can't really tell when that goes on and off. This one, oops, there we go. Okay, now you can kind of see that that's on. All right, so let's say I have OCD. So let's say I leave my apartment. Okay, I want to leave my apartment and go about my day. So I turn off the lights and I leave my apartment. But then when I leave my apartment, I think to myself, did I turn out all my lights? Because if I didn't turn out my lights, then my bill's going to be too high. I'm not going to be able to pay my bill, or the lamp's going to fall over. It's going to break. It's going to light my house on fire. I can't go about. I can't enjoy my day. The possibility that the light is still on, because if the light is still on, it's going to light my house on fire, and I'm not going to be able to live. I'm going to lose all my stuff. So I go back home. I see that the light is out, but then I come up, make sure I turn it on, turn it off. Okay, now it's out. And so what I'll do is, instead of just turning off the light once, I'll turn it off twice, or I'll turn it off 5 times. If I want to use a pin, and I want to use a pin right here, and I want to open it, I want to make sure the pin works. Most of us would do that 7 times. Not that I want to use it. And then I'll put it back up in its thing. All right, you get a number. It's the guy who will walk into his apartment, turn on the TV, turn off the TV, go to the blender, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, off. What, do you want to make a smoothie? No, but just in case I wanted to, I want to know that it works. Turn on the microwave, turn off the microwave. Because this is a person that has paranoia. This is a person who's been disappointed. This is a person where a lot of things haven't worked out. So they're going to overcheck to make sure that the things that they have in their life work. I'm obsessed with disappointment. So I'm compulsed with making sure that things work. So again, this is OCD. This is when somebody overcompensates on one side because of a fear of something else. There's some things in my life I can't control, so let me over control these things, and then it will in some way do this. That is OCD. And by the way, we've been trained for OCD since we were little kids. Walking down the street, don't step on a crack, you're gonna hurt your mama's back. Of course you're not. There's no way. You don't have that kind of magic or control, but it's put into our head. Hey, it's around Christmas time. Someone's watching you. They know when you're sleeping. They know when you're awake. They're watching you. Better be good, bad, goodness sake. You're going to be on the naughty list. You better make sure you're good. That's anxiety. Anxiety is taught to us very, very young, and it's reflected in this persistent, unwanted, and unshakable thoughts. So we do these repeated actions, whether it's washing the hands or whatever, You know, you're afraid of germs. Most of us wash our hands dry. Good. Well, if washing the hands once is good, wouldn't it twice be better? And wouldn't it 3 times be even better? And wouldn't it 10 be amazing? That's an irrational thought. But for someone with anxiety, it's not. There was a story in 1990 of a woman who reported to wash her hands 500 times a day. I've seen stories of people with OCD that not only will excessively wash their hands, but, you know, if warm water is good, isn't hot water better? Then they go with piping hot water. And then what happens is they open up a bar of soap, they use the bar of soap, they wash their hands, then they throw away the soap. Why? Because it's dirty. Is there any logic to this? No, of course there's not. But again, when it comes to anxiety, the frontal lobe is turned off. So then the brain is going to try to do repeated things that will at least make it feel a little bit better, provides evidence that you're doing something well, even if it's irrational. There's also what's called relationship OCD. This defines obsessive thoughts and compulsive actions, either about your current relationship or past relationships. I mean, again, we all get into a relationship. We all have these obsessive thoughts. Oh, it's new and it's not any whatever. But when you're like, oh, I'm in this new relationship, and this is great, but what if they leave me? And what if it goes bad? What if it's like my last one? I better call them. I better give them flowers. I better do these things. Because you can't trust it. You can't trust the relationship. So you have obsessive acts to make sure it's okay or to destroy it. Or you think back to your past relationships and what went bad and I don't want to do that again. And that's OCD. Okay, some more stuff there on OCD if you want to take a look at it. Let's talk real quick about PTSD, which we talked about back when we talked about stress. Post-traumatic stress disorder is people who experience an event outside the normal range of human experience. And as a result of that, they face severely distressing symptoms. Go back to Jennifer Lawrence, whose name I couldn't remember, the Hunger Games girl. If you've seen the Hunger Games, you know, you get through that first film, the next films are pretty much all about her PTSD from the first one, you know, because that's bad stuff that happened to her that she's got to sort of live with and work out and whatever else. So a lot of times it's the result of prolonged stressful situations where the person found themselves out of control and they're fearful of being back in there. Sometimes it's not prolonged. Sometimes it could be one event. You were the victim of abuse. You were the victim of a crime. You know, or if you're a war veteran, and again, you want to talk about the Hunger Games. When we ask people to sign up for the military, and then they go overseas, and suddenly you're hunting for other people while at the same time being hunted and not knowing who your friends are and who your enemies are and everything else, that's a big deal. You know, you're just going about your day and suddenly you're the victim of a school shooting. That's a huge deal. I mean, where I can't trust being safe at school. Where can I trust being safe at? And not only the victims of trauma, but sometimes PTSD is the guilt of causing the pain, moral injury, drone pilots, you know, guys who are in Vegas controlling a drone going over the Middle East. They can see what they're doing, the guilt that they feel of that. You know, I caused someone to die, or I might have caused someone to die. You know, Tippett, the pilot of the Enola Gay that dropped the first bomb on Hiroshima. He didn't know what he was dropping. And he got medals and he was a hero and everything else. But then as the years went on and he started to see the photographs on Hiroshima, and there started to be this debate on whether or not we should have dropped one, maybe not two, the guy became an alcoholic because of the PTSD. And you see a lot of this with veterans. We lose somewhere between 20 to 23 veterans on average a day to suicide. 20 to 23 American veterans are coming home, are committing suicide after they come home. I mean, I love the videos. I love the videos of the veterans coming home and surprising their kids. Great. They're fantastic. They're amazing. But what's the story a week or two later? I mean, again, when you're always walking around, you're always under attack. And a lot of guys can come back and a lot of girls can come back and be completely okay. But for some, it's a big, big struggle. Who do you trust? You know, a certain tone, anything like that. Who do you trust? Symptoms include flashbacks, nightmares, guilt, anxiety, again, usually tied to a specific event. If a hurricane starts stirring up in the Gulf, I'm going to go, oh, how's my generator? Do I have batteries? Do we have groceries? Everything going to be okay? But I'm not going to freak out too much about it because Hurricane Harvey didn't really affect me. But if you're someone that when Hurricane Harvey hit and the water started coming up to your door and you had to take all of your clothes and all of your furniture upstairs, and you were unsure of when the power was going to come back, hurricane in the Gulf is going to affect you a little bit more differently than it's going to affect me. Okay. If you can't control when you think about the event's going to control you. And again, that's why everybody goes, well, watch out, that's a trigger. Watch out, that's a trigger. Watch out, that's a trigger. Well, sometimes you got to deal with the trigger. Since many want to avoid the emotions associated with PTSD, it makes them susceptible to drug abuse. An estimated 20% of people who have PTSD also have drug abuse problems. 33% of US veterans who seek treatment for substance abuse were also diagnosed with PTSD. 35 to 50% of women who seek help for substance abuse were also the victims of sexual assault, including rape. And again, post-traumatic growth is a positive psychological change resulting from life struggles, difficult child, and everything else. But you got to be okay with it. Realize it's not your fault. You're a victim of circumstance. All of these you can't control. You couldn't control when that happened. And you got to live your life. You got to move on, which is easy for me to say, but sometimes you got to deal with that. And we'll talk about that when we talk about cognitive therapy and exposure, to ask Vietnam War veterans to sit down and watch Platoon, because instead of repressing the memory, you pull the memory out, you deal with it. And you go, you know what? That's what it was. I was 22. I was in Vietnam. Guy next to me gets his head blown off and his guts are all over the place. I'm not a doctor. Even if I was a doctor, I didn't have the equipment to help him at that time. And if I stayed there and tried to help my buddy who was already dying, I'm dead too. What good does that do? I can't feel guilty about being alive. Sometimes you got to deal with your emotions in PTSD. All right. Some more stuff there on PTSD as well. Eating disorders, another anxiety. You know, naturally, folks, all of us have anxiety about how we look. Every one of us, we look in the mirror immediately, we go to the worst feature of our body and we overemphasize it. You know, my wife comes to me and she goes, oh, my ankles are fat. I couldn't pick her ankles out of a lineup. You know, she'll have a concern about that, as a lot of people do. The pressure to conform to unrealistic body images. About 10% of teenage girls, to a lesser extent boys, attempt to manipulate these natural changes to their body through eating disorders. Boys, it tends to be more about putting on weight. Girls, it tends to be more about taking off. Now, anorexia is where you don't eat and you refuse to eat because food even starts to taste bad because you're punishing yourself for eating whatnot. And when, you know, a typical young girl, that you see right here, this young girl, if I stretch her into the typical Barbie she played with, that's kind of an unrealistic image that she's got there. And again, when you have these little girls and boys as well, grow up watching the Disney Channel and Nickelodeon, every little kid with their perfect little body and their perfect little face, and no one's got a pimple and they got their perfect little clothes, you're going to feel a little bit worse about yourself. So anorexia is this refusal to eat, where bulimia is eating because you want to try to control it, but then with the guilt of that, then it's the regurgitation of it, which can also be really, really bad. Not can also, is also really, really bad for you, because then the food gets all the acid in it, then you shove it up your esophagus and it's just the acid's just gonna destroy it. And then it comes out your teeth, the acid gets in the enamel and your teeth are gonna start to fall out, and you thought you already had anxiety before. It's just going to get worse with that. And although the number of teens impacted by this has grown slightly, the most worrisome trend is that it's happening to younger kids. 42% of kids from the 1st to the 4th grade wish that they were thinner. A significant amount of normal to underweight kids are dieting. And then what happens is you get the little phone and you take the little selfies and you put the little filters on those. And then you're like, I don't look like the filter. You put out this image of yourself that can you match it? And that can lead to these eating disorders, which are so bad when you're young, because when you're young, you need nutrition. You need to build the skin, the bone, the blood, the muscle. It's terrible to do to your body. It's absolutely brutal to do to your body. But again, some eating disorders that you can pause on and take a look at any of that information if you'd like. Okay. All right. So let's talk about explaining these anxiety disorders. Well, why do we have them? Well, fear is learned. It's learned from others, and some of it's within us, but it's learned from others. Some of us are born with a bigger amygdala, but we also learn. It's reinforced through positive and negative reinforcement. We learn what is safe and what is threatening to us. You know, you're in the car, and this was my grandparents, be in the car with them. Oh, we're in a neighborhood, lock your door. Oh my God, lock my door. I didn't know there were good neighborhoods and bad neighborhoods. So they're telling me to lock my door. You know, stimulus generalization. We fear one thing, we generalize it to others. One person treated you bad, one guy, one girl treated you bad, and you generalize all guys, all girls are like this. Observational learning. We observe the fear of others. We learn from those fears. Parents, friends, TV shows we watch. No reason to be afraid, except I saw it on TV. Cognition. When we are affected by threatening things, we feel that the world is threatening and we act accordingly to that. The biological perspective, as we talked about before, natural selection. Those who have paranoia and anxiety are going to take less risk. Therefore, their genes are more likely to pass on. You know, the brain, anxiety has lower activity in the frontal lobe, overactivity in the amygdala, and an interference of neuron activity. So sometimes it's medication is the cure to it. The psychoanalytic perspective would say it's some unresolved issue from your past that you got to go back and you got to deal with. So all of those are reasons for and explanations of anxiety. If you go through this PowerPoint, there's a whole bunch more on that we can't get to. ADHD, tic disorders, pulling hair, skin picking, pica, separation, reactive attachment, DMDD, adjustment disorder, hoarding disorders. If you've ever seen the show Hoarders, you know, these people that keep all this stuff that's anxiety there. You know, I'm holding on to this bag because I may need it one day, or I can't control a lot of OCD there. A lot of these people on Hoarders, divorced, you know, well, I can't control that relationship. I can't control my kids moving away, but I can't control my stuff until the stuff comes out of order. Illness, anxiety disorder, selective mutism, impulse control, gambling disorder, kleptomania, pyromania, and other things there as well. So that wraps up lecture 1. Next lecture, we are going to take a look at depression.